Welcome to the Cyber Risk Meetup edition. We have our special Mega C-Suite Story segment today. My name is Shamane Tan. I am the Chief Growth Officer at Privasec. I'm also the founder of Cyber Risk Meetup and your host. So today I'm really pleased to have Joanna Knox with us. She's the Chief Risk Officer at Telstra, and she's the second line of defense for all types of risk: strategic, financial, operational, and compliance. And Joanna's role includes corporate investigations such as fraud and conflicts of interest, resilience risk, and crisis management. Jo also has an amazing pedigree, holding a PhD in neuroscience and physiotherapy, a master's in anatomy, and a bachelor in physiotherapy. So thank you, Jo, for coming on this show. Now, this segment is Let's Talk Risk. So the role of a CRO is to oversee the organizational business risk that affects a company's profit and productivity. So when we talk about risk, there's market and credit risk, operational resilience, emergency threats. So Jo, what are your other key risk priorities, and where and how does cyber risk fit in?
Great, and thank you for having me today, Charmaine. It's good to be able to talk about this topic. I think the intersect between risk and cyber is obviously getting more important every day. So, like you said, my role covers all types of risk, and one of the key reasons I like working in risk is the fact that there are no boundaries to what I can focus on. And I think a key strength of a Chief Risk Officer is being able to be open to risks coming from anywhere, and therefore using that to be more creative about how we identify risks. But the way that we organise our risk framework, we've done it many different ways over the years, but I really like the way we currently have it, which is that we like to focus on the things that are more likely to have bad outcomes for our customers or our communities. So we organise primarily around safety risk first, and safety includes security for our employees or safety for members of the public if they're coming across our infrastructure. Then we have resilience risk for customers, and that is any way in which one of our services can impact whether or not our customers can do what they need to do with our services. So that's where cyber would primarily come out, although I'll come back to that. The third piece is around meeting customer commitments, which is making sure that we sell products and serve customers in a way that meets their expectations. And then the fourth is a little bit of a catch-all, but anything to do with compliance with respect to our customers, and particularly focusing on things like privacy and 000, where we have really important services that we play in the community, but it captures all of the compliance that we do. So that's the primary organisation framework that we have. Cyber risk, which we'll get onto a little bit, comes up in all of those categories. And so we also obviously have our overall risk taxonomy, where cyber stands alone, but I think we all realise that cyber and cyber risk can show up in any one of those categories. Probably for us, it's mostly about resilience for customers though, and increasingly when we're planning for our network and services resilience, cyber is the first thing that we need to worry about.
That's really good. So how do you plan for different cyber risk scenarios, and how do you get the business to prepare for this?
So there's the real answer and then there's the scenario answer. I'm going to do the real answer first, which is that for us, increasingly in the last year or two, we have had more cyber incidents that have reached the scale where we've had to deal with them at a crisis management level. Yeah. And as you mentioned, I'm in charge of crisis management. And so the most important way that we prepare is to do really thorough post-incident reviews on any incident that we do, but particularly in cyber. But then obviously we do run CMT scenarios as well. And I think about 50% of the scenarios for our crisis management team in the last couple of years have had a cyber element. So we either do a cyber-specific scenario, and we did one involving a big customer where there was an attack on us and we did the scenario together with one of our big enterprise customers. But then most of our other scenarios, we've built a cyber element into it because often cyber incidents don't stand alone. We do those jointly between my team and the cyber team so that we make the scenarios realistic from a cyber perspective. And we also use it to put the cyber operations teams through their paces so that they know how to respond. But then also really importantly, and my role is to make sure that the interaction with the board and the leadership team and the rest of the company is also getting prepared. So I don't want to say that we are prepared because who knows what might happen, but we've definitely been having lots of practice in the last few years.
That's really great, Joe. It's a progressive journey as well, and we have to always be on top of our game. So, speaking of strategy, how do you work with the other executives in executing your strategy? And do you have specific examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, so my risk strategy is simple. It is to make Telstra better at managing its risks. That's my purpose, it's my vision, it's my strategy. A couple of things I'll share. One is that we've developed a dashboard that we use at Telstra called the Risk Effectiveness Dashboard, and it's about assessing whether or not we manage risks effectively. So we've gone away from just looking at risk ratings and residual risk and controls effectiveness, and instead elevated it to holistically, when you step back and look at the risk, are we managing it effectively? And that's everything from, is the accountability clear? Do we have our risk appetite understood? Do we have our action plan to manage the risk in place? And have we got some kind of assurance to make sure that those actions are effective? So that my strategy is to have us be effective at managing our risk for all of our kind of top enterprise level risks, of which cyber is obviously one. But one of the key roles that we play in the central risk team is to connect the dots across all of the teams that have to work together. And as you know, the cyber team has to work closely with our physical security team, with our health and safety team, with our data governance team, with our responsible business team. So we have our risk framework at Telstra. We have a concept of our specialist risk teams, and those teams are the ones that have to work together to make risk management efficient across Telstra. So cyber is one of our specialist risk teams, and I work closely with our CISO on our frameworks and our operating models, our reporting, our incident management. We work really closely on all of those things, but then also find opportunities to improve how we work with other parts of the business, like supply chain risk is obviously really topical at the moment. So we'll work together on something together with them. Or physical security, I can talk about in a second, or privacy are probably the other big areas where we have shared governance.
Thanks, Joel. That's definitely really helpful to get an insight to how you actually work with the CISO, for instance. It's all about partnerships as well, and being able to understand the different stakeholders to know what's important to them and your role in supporting them as well. So what would you say is your top tip for other CROs on the role that they can play in helping their organizations be more cyber resilient? What's the mindset that they should have?
Let me just touch a little bit on that collaboration point first, and then I'll come to my top tips, which is I didn't, when I came into this role, it was my first risk role. You've described my diverse CV at the beginning. And so, to be honest, I didn't know much about cyber, and I didn't know much about all of the different risk domains that were in my remit. Because I am a bit of a technical geek, even though I'm not an engineer, for me, learning more about cyber has been one of the true delights of this role. I really think, it's at the cutting edge of making technology successful at the moment. But I reckon the CISO and their team and their boss are probably at the top of my calling list at the moment. So my top tip number one for other CROs is, if you're not close with your cyber team, then you should be. And at the moment, I think we all know that the level of cyber risk is getting worse faster than we can put better plans in place. And so the key tip that I have is to build a good relationship with your CISO so that there's no barriers, no absence of sharing. You should know about things really quickly. You should build trust with them, that you'll let them escalate in their timeframes, etc. And I don't know how many risk people are not good friends with their CISOs, but I think they all should be at this moment. So that's top tip number one. In terms of building it into resilience, obviously as a telco, resilience for our customers is arguably much more important than resilience of our own business. And so that has forced us to be really, really focused on our resilience frameworks. And over the years, we've built all sorts of resilience frameworks around network resilience, about IT resilience, about supplier resilience. And then just over the last 2 or 3 years, we've integrated them all into one big mega resilience framework where we look across all of the different things that might cause lack of resilience, either for our customers or for our internal processes. And cyber is one of the 5 domains that we always look at in that. And so I won't go into the details of how we do that, but we have formally created a resilience framework that includes cyber. But I guess the other top tip that's helped me add value to cyber, which is not something that I think it's easy to do if you're not a cyber person, is with all of the risks at Telstra, I try and set a high bar for myself, which is I want to have a perspective or a point of view on how effectively we're managing the risk, like I described with the dashboard earlier. And so for cyber, that was probably one of the hardest domains for me to learn enough about it to have a good point of view. So I actually put a person in my team in place whose whole role was to have a perspective on how effectively we're managing our cyber risk. Now, whenever I talk to the CISO about that, they're surprised because that's one person who's not a cyber expert necessarily versus the team working in cyber. And so it's hard for that person to come up with a point of view, but I think you have to find a way to bring your risk expertise and assess how we're managing cyber risk and then use that to challenge the cyber team. That's exactly how we manage all of our other risk oversight, and cyber should be no exception, even though it's really specialised and technical.
I really love that. Thank you, Jo, for sharing all your tips. I think they're really practical and helpful as well. So my last question is a bit different from the previous one, and it's more about for other CROs, right? If they were to have their own checklist, what would you say are the top 3 questions that they need to be asking themselves to determine if they are actually assessing cyber risk effectively?
So 3, appetite, metrics, and awareness. So risk appetite is number 1. That's obvious for a risk person to say that. But again, because of how technical cyber is, we've probably spent more time wrestling with what is an appropriate risk appetite for cyber than we have for many of our other risks. And in fact, we've had the greatest debate between the board and our management team in order to agree our cyber risk appetite. So to assess whether or not you're doing cyber risk well enough, you can't answer that question unless you have agreed a risk appetite. And I think because the expectations and the knowledge gap between the cyber experts and the management team or me or the board actually mean that having a proper risk appetite debate and discussion is more important than in many other risk types. So that's number 1, make sure you've agreed on a risk appetite. On number 2, you've got to have the right metrics. Before we went through that process of agreeing our risk appetite, I would say the metrics that the cyber team proposed to be on all of our risk dashboards for cyber were probably not the best metrics. I don't think they actually helped us understand the risk profile properly. They were, again, probably a little bit too technical. But after we'd gone through the debate and the discussion on what our cyber risk appetite was, we were able to step back and choose much better metrics that actually helped the business understand better. And they were much more focused on controls and making sure that we had risk management actions in place than they were on incidents and attacks, which is where the cyber team was probably going before. So I think putting that risk lens on it really helped change the lens on what were the best metrics. And then the third one is awareness. We all know that our best cyber defences can be brought down by little vulnerabilities across the company. And so you must keep your finger on the pulse around how aware your staff and your organisation are, because the education, phishing drills, alerts, communications, all that kind of stuff, you have to keep doing that given how quickly the landscape is evolving. And so again, making sure that you've got the comms team involved in that, HR involved in that, reporting the right things, building the right phishing drills, all that stuff, so that you keep everyone on their toes. The cyber team can only do so much. The rest of us have to help with the rest of it.
Excellent. No, I think that's a brilliant way to end it. And it's all part of that ecosystem. Everyone has to work together. It's a partnership thing as well. To combat cyber effectively is not a one-man show. So I love that,
Yep.
you know, in terms of the insights you have given into how you guys have done it really well. And there's a lot to learn from it. So any last words, Jo? I know we've covered a lot.
My last words. I think I'll go back to the exhortation to other chief risk officers to educate themselves about cyber. I think it's not okay in this day and age for cyber to be something that only the cyber team understand. The rest of us who are working in risk, or even our CEO, is incredibly focused on understanding cyber and making sure that we are advocates for cyber in the community and in the country, not just for Telstra. And I think the more that we can all understand it, the better we will be, rather than being scared by it being too technical and therefore something that normal people can't understand.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Joel. Really appreciate you for taking the time. It means a lot and it's very, very helpful indeed. So thanks again, Joel.
No worries.
Take care.
Thank you.